No. Okay, look, I am genuinely happy for every fan who wanted this. I really am. This is a nice thing that one of the world's largest corporate conglomerates is doing for its customers. I just don't know what more I can say on the subject without actually seeing this version of the film. And like I've always said, if this ever does get released, I will happily sit down and watch it, if for no other reason than the fact that I'm a big fan of seeing alternate versions of movies. And to be clear, I've never flat out denied this film's existence. I've always said that at best, it's just sitting somewhere in a very unreleasable state. And judging from the fact that it's not going to be released until next year, that pretty much proves that. Any other detail that I might have hit or missed here and there is really inconsequential at this point. So no, I don't want to talk about Zack Snyder's Justice League today or really any time in the near future. We're just going to sit and wait until the movie actually comes out and I can see it with my own eyes to give a full, fair and balanced opinion of it. So until then, we're not going to talk about this version of Justice League. Instead, we're going to talk about another version of Justice League that never got released, only this time, it's a version that will never be released. Like, actually never get released. Cast your minds all the way back to 2007. The MCU had yet to even begin, but people still thought there were just too many damn superhero films in the cinemas. And yeah, there were a lot, especially when compared to what we saw in the 90s, but behind the scenes, there were in fact countless superhero and comic book films not being made at all. They would either just get optioned or possibly even written and cast before just stopping production all of a sudden. Like, I honestly lost track of the amount of times a Deathlock movie got announced and canceled during that decade. There were also, of course, several other films that started and stopped, like a live-action Batman Beyond movie in the early 2000s, and even Solid Snake himself, David Hayter, was tapped to write and direct a Black Widow movie way back in 2004. The one thing all of these movies had in common, however, was that they were all solo films. None of these unmade superhero films were big team-up movies. Remember, this was several years before the Avengers came out and proved that a concept like that could in fact work. But then in 2007, Warner Brothers commissioned writers Michelle and Kieran Mulroney to write a script for a Justice League movie. This came about after several solo superhero films like Joss Whedon's Wonder Woman and David Goyer's Flash projects all fell apart and were canceled. Now, at the time, both Batman and Superman had made their long-awaited returns to the big screen. When this news broke that there was going to be a Justice League movie, pretty much everyone just naturally assumed that Christian Bale and Brandon Routh would reprise their roles in an upcoming Justice League film. But actually, no. This movie, officially known as Justice League Mortal, would be a completely separate thing from Batman Begins and Superman Returns. It would have a new Batman, a new Superman to go along with their Wonder Woman, their Green Lantern, their Aquaman, their Martian Manhunter, and their Flash. Now sure, that seems strange now to have a Justice League movie with a completely different Batman and Superman from the Batman and Superman in other films going on at the time. But in 2007, when we really haven't had anything like this before, we were willing to take whatever we can get if it meant seeing the Justice League on the big screen. I mean, if you think about it, that's kind of what's happening now with the DC films. Either way, Warner Brothers put Justice League Mortal on the fast track, hoping to begin production as soon as possible to avoid any potential conflict with the upcoming writer's strike. In September of 2007, George Miller was tapped to direct the thing, and casting began not that long after. And for the most part, it was fully cast. You had Armie Hammer as Batman, DJ Kotora as Superman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, Adam Brody as The Flash, Hugh Keys Byron as Martian Manhunter, Teresa Palmer as Talia al Ghul, Zoe Kazan as Iris Allen, Santiago Cabrera as Aquaman, Jay Baruchel as Maxwell Lord, Common as the Jon Stewart Green Lantern, and even Anton Yelchin as the Wally West Flash. Now, the actual plot of the movie really is something else. It's a big, sprawling epic spanning the entire globe featuring characters and concepts from the entire history of the DC universe. Basically, it was an adaptation of the Tower of Babel story by Mark Waid and Howard Porter. There were elements from other classic comics in there, like the OMAC Project and, believe it or not, Crisis on Infinite Earths, but by and large, this was a Tower of Babel adaptation. To summarize, Talia al Ghul and Maxwell Lord teamed up to take down the Justice League using data they collected from hacking Batman's Brother Eye satellites. This actually causes the Justice League to form and team up to try and stop these two villains. And really, that's about as simple as I can make this story. There is a lot going on here. Batman has to fight rogue OMAC robots that turn into motorcycles at one point. Superman and Wonder Woman have this big knockdown, drag-out fist fight that winds up on the moon at some point. Barry Allen sacrifices himself at the end, just like in Crisis on Infinite Earths, in order to stop Maxwell Lord and his rogue OMACs. And at the end of the movie, they wind up fighting Starro, just like in their very first appearance from all the way back in the 60s. Is it spoiling a movie if it was supposed to come out 10 years ago but ultimately never got made? I don't think it is. Unlike most comic book movies that never got made, Justice League Mortal got right up to the edge of starting production before things got shut down. In addition to being cast, all of the characters actually got fully functional costumes made for them by Weta Workshop. Armie Hammer has talked about his Batman costume in particular over the years, talking about the titanium batarangs it came with, and the make of the gloves and the cape, and the fit of the cowl and how it had microphones and speakers in it. The cast even went through extensive character-specific training. Santiago Cabrera, who again was playing Aquaman, went and swam with the dolphins in order to get a feeling of what it would be like to swim with exotic creatures. Ultimately, this movie was ready to go. The cast was ready, the crew was set, locations had been picked out, everything was just gearing up to start production as soon as possible. But then they didn't start production at all. Why is that? Well, actually, there was a lot that happened. The first thing was, in fact, the writer's strike of 2007 and 2008. While the script for Justice League Mortal was finished before the strike started, the strike did put production on hold until it ended in February 2008. So moving the production start date while still keeping the intended summer 2009 release date was bad enough. Making matters worse was the fact that this movie was quickly becoming very expensive. Now, obviously, a movie like Justice League with its big ensemble cast and big wild concepts and special effects was always going to cost a fortune. So the plan was to film it in Miller's home country of Australia in order to get a nice big rebate from the Australian government to help keep the production costs down. But unfortunately for the production, the Australian government deemed Justice League Mortal ineligible for the big tax rebate. The primary reason was because there were not enough Australians in the cast. Yes, really, that's why they didn't get their tax rebate, because there were not enough Australians in the cast. Never mind that the entire crew was native Australians. There were only, I think, 4 native Australians in the cast itself, and that did not fly with the Australian government. So this, of course, delayed things even further. Warner Brothers finally decided to move the production to Canada, set up offices there, and finally get ready to start shooting the damn thing in July of 2008. The only problem is, July of 2008 was also when The Dark Knight premiered. Now, typically, when people say that The Dark Knight was a game changer, usually what they mean is that it was one of the first comic book films to take its source material as seriously as other more serious films. You know, real cinema stuff. But The Dark Knight was also a game changer in a sense that it changed the way Warner Brothers went about wanting to make DC superhero films. Basically, they no longer wanted to pursue the idea of having different movie series with different Batman and Superman in it. And it was actually this move that officially ended production of Justice League Mortal. The cast was told to come in and get back their scripts and costumes, all the offices were closed, and Warner Brothers began their new initiative of solo DC superhero films, starting with Green Lantern. Yeah. Side note, Man of Steel was actually part of this initiative, the solo superhero film initiative. It wouldn't become part of an expanded universe until Batman vs. Superman came along and effectively made it part of a big expanded universe. And that is what eventually led to Justice League. Batman vs. Superman, not necessarily Man of Steel. So in the end, Justice League Mortal never got in front of cameras. Nothing was officially filmed for this movie. So there will never really be a George Miller cut of Justice League anytime ever. That's not to say that we'll never know what Justice League Mortal could have looked like. There have been leaks and unofficial releases of this film. It's just that what has been shown to the public is of varying quality, and there honestly isn't that much of it. For example, this is the only known picture we have of the entire cast in costume. It's blurry, very low quality, and while you can clearly see who's who, you can't really make out all the finer details of everyone's costumes. You compare this to the first look of Robert Pattinson's Batman, and even though it's just a close-up of his chest and the lower half of his head, you can clearly see what his costume is going to look like. You can make out the details of it here and there. Also, everybody in this picture is actually a stuntman or a stand-in with the exception of Megan Gale. That's actually her wearing her Wonder Woman costume. In fact, there are actually much higher quality pictures of Megan Gale in the costume. And here they are. And to be fair, this is recognizably a Wonder Woman costume. It's just not as comic book accurate as, say, what Gal Gadot would eventually wear. It's not bad by any means, but it's not as good as what we eventually got. Everything else is either heavily watermarked, a low quality piece of concept art, or Armie Hammer's unfinished Batman cowl. There does exist, however, storyboards and concept art for Wonder Woman and Superman's big climactic battle at the end of the film, and a draft of the script for Justice League Mortal did leak online in 2013. But other than that, all the information we have on this movie was really just pieced together from various sources over the years. Surprisingly, a lot of those sources were Armie Hammer himself, because he talks about this a lot in interviews over the years. People always ask him about this. But of course, with all we know about this movie, or what little we know about this movie, there's always the big question. Would it have been any good? Would George Miller and co. have been able to pull off something this crazy and big years before the Avengers even thought about doing it? I honestly don't know. The story itself sounds pretty cool, and it does feature a lot of interesting moments, like the Superman Wonder Woman fight sounds nuts. The Omax going rogue seems to be an interesting idea. Just the thought of the original 7 members of the Justice League appearing on the big screen at once just sounds great. But on the other hand, this is a very loaded script, perhaps too loaded. The writers were afraid they weren't going to be able to edit it before the writer's strike happened, so they just crammed it with as much stuff as possible to make the biggest movie imaginable. To me, this sounds like a movie loaded with so much crap it would have been easy to get lost in, and not the good kind of get lost in. Rather than focusing on a simple and clean narrative, it sounds like this would have been a constantly moving machine going from one idea to the next with no break or breathing room to speak of. And yes, George Miller is a fantastic director, but would he have been able to fix the script on his own and clean it up and actually give us a presentable movie? We'll never know at this point. Still, I think we can safely assume that this would have been very interesting to see. And who knows how the superhero comic book movie landscape would have actually been shaped if this got released years before Avengers did. Of course, we would eventually get a Justice League movie that was, let's say, controversial, but there will always be that cloud of what if hanging over future Justice League movies because of Justice League Mortal. Especially because after Justice League Mortal folded, George Miller went on to make Happy Feet 2 and the greatest action movie of all time. It just raises so many more questions, like, if George Miller did make Justice League Mortal, does that mean he would have never made Mad Max Fury Road? Does there exist a timeline where he got to make both movies? And if so, does making Justice League Mortal affect the way he would have made Fury Road? But that's the story of Justice League Mortal, the first Justice League movie that we did not get to see. Are you upset that we didn't get to see it? Would you like to have seen what George Miller could have done with the Justice League? Or are you happy with the version Zack Snyder and technically basically Joss Whedon actually gave us? Let me know down below. or anywhere on the internet. I know there are a handful of you in the comments right now saying something like, well, actually, the made-for-TV Justice League movie was the first Justice League movie never to be released, but come on. You know that doesn't count. I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I will put a link in the description to the script for Justice League Immortal if you want to actually read it and see for yourself what kind of madness this could have been. Also have Amazon affiliate links down there to some Justice League comic book stories that are much more polished and presentable, much more finished products, I guess you can say. And of course, don't forget that we have new videos on this channel every single Tuesday and Wednesday, with Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern being Wulff Den Live. So subscribe to see all of that, like this video, and share with a friend who thinks that Zack Snyder's version of Justice League is truly the ultimate version of Justice League. Show them this video, and maybe they'll see that possibly the ultimate version of Justice League might not have been made yet. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Wash your hands, and be nice to each other.